We start at 10:30, is that correct?
Yes.
This is the awkward part when you're the first
Oh,
person.
yeah.
Yes, and they're trying to make sense out of different time zone in your brain.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thank you very much for being at our session this morning. My name is Diane Rodriguez. I'm a professor of IRIEC Special Education and an associate dean for academic affairs at Fordham University in New York City. And my best friend, as my son will call her, and colleague for over 30 years, Dr. Socorro Herrera, is a professor of teaching English as a second language and director of the Center for Multilingual.
It's always hard.
Yeah, it's always hard
Center
to
for
remember.
Intercultural and Multilingual Advocacy.
Yes, yes. And she has over 9 textbooks on the topic and over 100 articles in peer-reviewed journals on biography-driven instruction. And today we're going to be sharing a little bit with you about equitable and inclusive teaching for diverse learners with disability, a biography-driven approach. And many of our doctoral students and faculty have used the biography-driven approach as a research study and a framework for teaching students all across the country and abroad. And what we have done is, as she said, wouldn't it be wonderful to take the biography-driven BDI approach and try it with students with disabilities? And this work of love started 5 years ago, and getting the book contract with Teachers College Press took probably a year, right? But between COVID and getting permissions from parents and teachers, it took a bit longer. So we were expecting our book to be out last December, but it just came out this month. So we are very excited that we can share with you the end product and talk a little bit about the framework and how can we help students who come from multilingual backgrounds and have disabilities. So I would like to, I'm going to start clicking here because we work.
I'll start out and
we'll
we'll
be
go
going click hopping here.
You know, as I sat and listened this morning, immediately you get filled with this joy. You know, you get with this joy because there's so many connections, and you just want to go talk to everyone, and you want to talk to Noor, who shared some great, great conversations. And I love that they said changing, yet not fully changing. Because I think no matter what context we're in, whether we're together in Guatemala or Peru or Ecuador, or that holds true in education, especially with children with disabilities or children who speak a different language. The whole idea of contextualizing and operationalizing what it looks like in context and preparing pre-service and in-service teachers, those spoke to both of our hearts. And so this book that she's talking about came out of a work of love, in that in doing the work that we both do in schools, teachers would say, oh my gosh, when I was biography driven, when I really was present to the community of learners I was teaching, even the special ed kids could do more. And I was like, what the heck? It was actually another word, but what the heck? Of course, because the human brain is, if you look at neuroscience, it's always bending and shaping, and we don't know what it is that we're going to do situationally in the moment, in living moments, to be able to lift every single child in our classroom. And that includes a child who has a low incidence disability, such as visual impairment, or a child who has behavior challenges, a child with dyslexia. We don't know that. So we thought, IDEA in the United States, we thought, with the best of intentions, we have yet to arrive in doing what we need to be doing in classroom practice, in operationalizing what needs to happen. And so what we're sharing today is some of the work that we've done in classrooms that are possibly getting there. Because I always say to teachers, this isn't the be all and end all. The magic moment is you as a teacher, and being able to, in living moments, accommodate, because it's not a piece of paper, it's not a program, it's not a toolbox, it's the human being taking all this information and listing it. So we're going to talk about two things because we won't be able to talk about all of them, but we're going to talk about the non-discriminatory evaluation and what things we might be able to do in the classroom, and then this parental participation, which I like to think of in two sides. One, that parental participation, that's the advocacy piece. Know your rights, ask the questions. But also that parental participation that starts as grassroots, as what it is that we as teachers can do in classroom practice that begins to engage the parents in partnerships that actually teach us a whole lot about the child before we come to that team of specialists to talk about disability. And so it's those two things that we'll talk about a little bit.
So one of the things that I want you to know is that we cover all of this information throughout using biography-driven instruction. So it's based on the Individual with Disability Act that we come up with strategies and ideas on how to better prepare and teach students with disabilities.
So I gave you a piece of paper. If you don't have one, I'll give you another one. We all know about the trifold. I'm Mexican, from Mexico originally, so I always say, get a burrito, un burrito. And so in classroom, it'd be a trifold with 3 columns. So you can do that just very quickly. Because we have to be engaged in taking notes. If it's not made public, I don't know what you're processing. I'll give you a piece of paper. So if you look, you're going to have one column that says challenges, one column that says caveats, and one column that says considerations. What I'd like for you to do is up at the very top of your paper, write those 3, and then just do a quick front. It's only be like a minute. What are the common challenges within your own setting? What are the caveats that keep us from kind of moving forward, addressing those challenges? And then as we go through the session, what are some things that you could consider? Not only from what we share, but from what you hear from your partner. So if you think about IDEA or your own policies, your own procedures within your context, what are some of those challenges? I love, what was it? How many languages did she say there were?
22.
How many?
22.
22. I wanted to say I work in a school that has 45 languages in one high school. And so, yes, that definitely is a challenge when we start talking about IDEA and assessment and all of that. So. You haven't thought of one challenge yet? You want me to make a list for you? Okay, turn to a partner. And I always say when I do demonstration teaching, if it's not on the paper, where is it? In your head, in your mind. If it's not in your mind because you just didn't have breakfast, you're going to get an idea from your friend, and that's all right. So just challenges, those caveats to those challenges, and then just some considerations. And like I said, the considerations we hope you take away as we go through the sessions. Just very quick, turn to someone and talk, try out our partner.
And information on parents who see those like who have evidence communicate with them.
Okay, I could say class, and you would say yes, or I could count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I love it because Elizabeth just said, voila, one of the challenges is evaluation. One of the challenges is evaluation, and especially when you have multiple languages, when you have poverty, because remember that depending on your language, depending on your experiences, there's so many things that make up our being and our being able to engage in cognitive processes, because everyone engages in them, we just have different pathways. And so our challenges are always that difference to scores. Placement for children is usually that score. The threats to the validity, all of that, and either thinking around language, because if you speak a language other than the language of the space that you're being evaluated in, it becomes this conversation that I always like, just like I said, whether I'm in Latin America or China, the conversation is always the same, So the caveats are those assumptions that are inherent to the testing. Elizabeth, you shared, what was another caveat?
First of all, you don't have the testing in the child's native language, you don't have accurate information, and also the issue around languages around communicating with parents. And so now parents aren't aware of what's going on, and you're not getting that data from parents on the child either, if you don't have somebody who can communicate with them. I'm thinking specifically about sort of less spoken languages, right? Like Spanish is fairly common, at least in the United States, but now you've got kids with all sorts of languages, so.
All of those are, and I wish we had time to just kind of go deeper in this. She says, remember, it's 30 minutes.
And for me, as a special ed teacher, when I first moved to the United States, I had this idea that there was perfection in teaching and perfection in the school system and perfection in the resources. And I never understood the extreme poverty from some schools and the discrimination of kids. And I moved to New York to become a teacher, to be a teacher in the school, and I see this kid is in special education, and he has the book Don Quixote. But that's a very difficult book to read in Spanish, and I'm a high school teacher, so I asked the kid, why are you reading the book? And he has the book, and he said, of course I'm reading the book. And he was so much into the book that I said, read a page for me. He reads the page, and I asked him, what does it mean? He tells me, and I said, so then why are you in special ed? He said, I don't speak English. And that's when I became an advocate of special education, especially in the evaluation area, because so many students are disproportionately identified as having a disability and is a language difference. And then what has happened, that evaluation and those assumptions has hindered their education. And once they pass the third grade and fourth grade, their educational level keeps going down and shrinking. And that's why we're so concerned, and we want to make sure that teachers understand what are the strategies to better inform their practices.
So just think about that maximum for considerations. Always thinking, do our stories describe the same child? Because it's very fascinating when you start talking to community members, family, school, the person who's doing the evaluation, our stories can sometimes have tensions, they're in conflict. So I would just really quickly share, and there's a bunch of stories. I need to start writing down the ones that are not Spanish, but this one was so funny. So a child, they're doing an evaluation and they can't seem to talk about similarity and differences. So the evaluator, who is also a co-author, moves on and she just starts talking with the kids and starts talking about things that are the same and different in their community, and asks both the children she's assessing to draw. And one of the kids draws this, and then after he draws it, he gets into this conversation with another child, and is talking about a cholo, which is kind of a person who's out in the community who may not be always doing great things if we take the stereotypical definition of it, and a good boy. And they start talking about the cholo and the good boy. And tell me about a cholo, she asks. And she says, well, they get in fights, they have a sharp car, they do drugs, they're in jail, they have a girlfriend. Well, tell me about a good boy. They're happy, nice, goes to school, mom is happy, has a job. And tell me what they share in common. What is similar? Boys, they have money, they have pants, they have mom, they have a wife. And so, here's this richness in the story for this child who can't seem to pass the evaluation in any way, shape, or form. So something that simple, got her to where she needed to be and beginning to assess in a different way. And this would hold the same across all contexts. That's where the stories matter so much. The next one, just very, very quickly, is think about these questions. What are the considerations previously discussed, looked across different landscapes and ecologies? So when we are here, when we're in rural context versus urban context, when we're, the type of school that's being attended, there's so many considerations. And what's the impact of intentional practices that are instructionally sound? Because really intention and being present to what is being taught. And what difference does it make in assessment for learners? And how does the context and situational monitor impact the whole class and how it is that child engages? This morning in the presentation, oftentimes, even in the United States, the child who has a disability is usually placed with a paraprofessional. And there they are working. That's not an inclusive setting. They might as well be somewhere else because it sends the community, this child is not part of the community. And so no, go back. So we're not going to talk too long about this, but we've talked in the work that we do about those 4 dimensions of the learner. And ultimately, when we want to consider the stories, we have to look at that life. We have to look at those things that laughter and that love that are part of the socio-emotional, and where this child is situated in any given point in time in the context of teaching and learning and living, because we live in and out of school. That linguistic, because we work with so many second language learners, the comprehension, communication, and expression differs given your dialect, given your region, given so much, and that when we get into those policies and procedures and curriculum, it is honed in on one. And it's that person that's the actor in the teaching situation that has to begin to understand how it is that in the moment you're scaffolding, you're differentiating, you're accommodating, you're adapting. Which is oftentimes a craft that has to be taught and nurtured with pre-service and in-service teachers. And then cognition, we all know and think can apply very differently. If we truly want to, for our populations who have disabilities or are pre-referred, if we actually want to access, engage, and provide hope, that hope was talked about this morning, we have to look at that biopsychosocial history. That biological and how that child presents that biological and what the assumptions we hold about that biological. That social, again, talked about this morning, because that impacts that psychological dimension of the learner, and that has a lot, of impact. So in school, in testing, we have to think of that official space, but more than anything, we have to think about that unofficial space, that thing that we just talked about, because every child presents in a very unique way into the context. And it's not until we are driven by strategies that support the learning, that allow for translanguaging. In the United States, when we're working with different languages, it's allowing your language to shine. And then that integration of familial knowledge into the assessment, into the instruction, into the post-instructional assessment. So this, in the work that we do, the espoused is huge. We talk a good game, but I love that this morning they said, but how do we operationalize it? How do we create a framework that it doesn't matter if you're in rural or in urban, if you have 45 languages or 22 languages, how is it that we operationalize that? And so it's in that ebb and flow of the instruction and what it is that the teacher does. And I'm sorry, I'm talking so much only because it's 30 minutes and we're like, but, okay. I know, I'm like, Diane, you're supposed to be presenting. She'll take up over here in a second. You have that piece of paper I want you to turn it to the other side. I'm going to show you 3 pictures because this is one of the strategies that we use in the classroom. And I know if you're a teacher trainer or if there's one to take out and it really shows the whole lot. I'm going to show you a picture and I want you to think, just let your mind flow. What is it? What do you see? What does it make you think about? What does it make you wonder? There's no right or wrong answers. Spelling doesn't matter. You can use whatever language you want, and you can draw if you want, but sometimes we don't feel like writing. So I just invite you to think about the picture and tell me what it is that you see. What do you see? What do you think about? Okay.
But no longer.
We'll do a little strategy.
Yeah.
We knew that was gonna happen,
I know.
and we cut it off.
We cut it. Okay, turn to your partner. What did you see? What did you think of? Just 2 seconds. I'm sorry if it's not written, it's in your head. Okay, if we had time to unpack it, we would be able to discuss how it is that this becomes an equitable space for all. Because there is no failure. I was in a classroom right before school was out, a child that was visually impaired, and I loved the way that one child described the picture to the child and asked him what they made him think of, and then that child wrote it down. And the teachers will say, it's inclusive, everyone can put something down, and from that I can, so if you think about that value added that we all bring something to the table, and then through, those for children who are very oral, but don't write, don't read, they still are very much in the classroom. Okay, go to the next one, because actually I took embedding familial knowledge. Just know that if you send something home that the parents have a capacity to do, even if they have no time, and defining family as your neighbor, your older brother, anyone that cares and loves for you, and then also being able to do that in the school. What we get with literacy is not oppressive. That's why I'm so excited to hear your session. Okay, Diane, finish it out for us.
So what basically we want to do is transforming those learning spaces. We talked only here very briefly about linking language learners, linking language learning. But we have other strategies that we implement with the students, and we collect the data, and we Dr. Herrera is the one who's always out in the schools working with teachers and making sure that they're able to learn in dynamic ways. Right here in this learning space, we have what we call the DOT activity. And what we do in this DOT activity, which I even do it in my classes at the university, we have the A to Z. And with the students, we give them a topic. And with that topic, we ask them to either write it in their native language, in English, make a picture, and they start writing words, and doesn't matter the spelling, of what does that topic mean. For example, if I was to do bilingual special ed, we go from A to Z, and some people will write assimilation, acculturation, and words like that. So what we do is then that we start borrowing words. And after we borrow words from one of each other, then we start making sentences. And that's a practice about building and scaffolding the language of the student who might potentially be identified as having a disability, and it's just a language difference. So we want this to be a very dynamic process of learning. We talk also about the social cultural spaces and how do we invite all of our learners to bring that culture into the classroom, and how do we respond and communicate with the students as well. So those are areas. At the beginning, we thought that we were going to have more time to talk about the heart aspect of the biography-driven instruction, which is about getting to know your student, and that's part of the evaluation. But when we start going and diving deeper into all of the aspect of teaching culturally, linguistically diverse learners with disability, then we start looking into all of the areas and strategies that can be infused into all of the classroom setting activities. And let me know how long I still have then.
Like 2 minutes.
Like 2 minutes.
Yeah,
Like
so
2
let's
minutes.
just
Let
put
me
the
go-
very
Let
end.
me go to the end.
Oops, how about this one right here? That one.
Okay, so basically, to summarize, in a very short second here, 30 seconds, discovering and maximize student access. Culturally responsive and culturally sustaining. We cannot sustain something until you know it is there. You cannot be responsible unless you're first attentive. And we cannot sustain something you nurture and love it. So these are things about teaching in a humanistic way that we took into consideration when teaching students from diverse backgrounds who have been identified with having disability. So becoming, belonging, reimagining equity for all learners across contexts. What are the necessary tools to consider when reimagining the space of equity and inclusion? How effective are your current policies and practices based on what you learn? And what roadmap would you create based on what you take away today? And take away today from the whole conference, from the beginning all the way till the end, because it's a roadmap. We don't have the right and wrong answers. Well, we have the wrong answers for many things, but the right pathways for teaching students with disabilities. And many go with the best intention, and sometimes we hinder our students' learning. And we know that it's not a one-size-fits-all. And we know that there are many evidence-based practice out there that some individuals think that it's a one-size-fits-all. And we have to be able to adapt and create those spaces and learning to all students in the classroom, so it could be inclusive. So thank you very much.
Boom. Just any comment or question or thought? Like I said, 30 minutes is like, whew.
It's difficult. It was much more difficult than what I thought.
Yes.
I have a question. I have the book. I've got to dive into it. But the biography-driven approach, is it specific to a certain content area, like writing, for example, or is it really you could use it across?
You could use it across.
And that's the thing. So someone said the other day, oh, they're ready. We can talk about it later. Catch me, because it is, It's basically how do you enact in any classroom inclusion? Like I said, although I have a certificate in special ed, it's not something I practice, but I work in classrooms that are very inclusive, and the book came as a result of that. Go ahead.
Okay,
Sorry.
so my name is Barry Bullis. I am an adjunct professor at Pace University in New York City. So not very far
I was
from.
gonna say, yeah, right near Fordham.
But I work full-time in the New York City public schools. So, and I have 5 children, and 4 of them have learning or mental health challenges. So the mental health challenges have all developed since the last time I was at a conference. And we talk about policy versus services and advocacy. I literally just wrote an email to the director of special services in my district because I am in a mediation process with them because they did not give my daughter services a year ago. So I'm still trying to get counseling and speech services that they didn't give her. So it happens everywhere. I will try to stay at the heart of my presentation, which is similar to what we've heard this morning in the keynote and what we just heard from the other presenters. Literacy, reading, writing, language is a gatekeeper. Historically, it's been used to keep people down, right? Certain groups were not allowed access, right? And nowadays, especially in the United States, we say, oh no, everybody has access. But what we say and what we do is very different. I work in an area, my full-time job, I work in an area where the students are low income. And the 10 years I've been back in New York City public schools, I've worked with students who are low income. And I was saying this morning at our table breakfast, for 50 years, the United States have been trying to change education and improve outcomes. And our outcomes have gone nowhere. They're the same now as they were in 1970. Why, with all this work we're doing, nothing changes? Right? And I truly believe it's socio-political that the powers that be don't want it to change. But I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about the children that I service. So, some current statistics: 2/3 of students in the United States are not proficient in literacy. In New York City, 80% of children are not reading on grade level, right? The research says 95 to 98% should be able to. And we know at birth the ones that are not going to. Those are the ones who have the cerebral palsy, microencephaly, right? And for men since the 70s, since I was born, we've had the reading wars in the United States, where we keep having these different ideologies fighting with each other and trying to exclude the ideas of the other. And it's a false dichotomy. We don't have skills versus natural reading. And you can't have natural reading without skills. So it's a false. So it's an argument that's wasting a lot of time and energy and hurting our children, right? What do they say? When 2 elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. So what do we do about it? One, we give students access. We give access to students to appropriate instruction and access to materials. And then we also need proper representation. So our students need to see themselves in the materials, in the situations, and there needs to be an accurate portrayal of cultural histories. We also said at breakfast this morning, the winners get to write the history, right? And in America, we like to pretend that our history is very different than it was. So many years ago, I took a tour through Germany and was actually astounded as an American how true to their history their signage, their museums are. They didn't sugarcoat anything. So, so we need to be true to the history of our country and the history of what we've allowed to happen or not happen. And then social justice. We have to heal the trauma. There's big, people talk about trauma when kids have accidents or there's, divorce in the family. But there's educational trauma that happens all the time. When we don't teach children in a way they need to learn, and then we blame the child. We have to change that narrative. We have to heal that trauma if we really want students to thrive. And we have to decenter historically privileged groups. Right? New York City just mandated to talk about access to instruction. So as I was saying, we have to have both sides. Students do need instruction in the science of reading, which is big in the United States right now. It shouldn't be big right now. I did that 25 years ago in my education. But they need the instruction on the skills. But skills are just a means to the end. The whole point is to be able to read and write and communicate and to, use that to your advantage. So this is where the division has been in the United States about, oh, we need skills. No, we need reading. No, we need skills. No, we need both, right? And so it's called balanced literacy. It was called balanced literacy in the 90s. We can't even say that in the United States because of a certain person who took it over. But they need regular interaction with reading materials that are above their level, at their level, and below their level. They need the whole span of literature, right? And when the literature is above their level, the teacher does the work. When it's at their level, it's the student doing and teacher in an interaction. And it's when it's below their level, the student does all the work. It's a spectrum. We're so stuck in seeing it one way or the other that we constantly miss the spectrum. Constantly. So I'm always fighting my colleagues, like independent reading. When kids have time to read, what should they be reading? And my answer is anything they want. It's independent reading. Let them read whatever they want. It doesn't have to be specific. And then materials. The Oregon Project lists 7 global book distribution organizations, right? Do they have materials in their hands that they can read? In the United States, there's so many different ways to get materials, and we still don't give the students the access. The next is representation. Children need to see characters and stories that represent them. At present, that's not the case. In the New York University in New York City has a social justice department, and they study curriculum and books that are in New York City. And this was a study that they did. So almost 80% of students in New York City are Black or Latino, which you probably not think that coming from anywhere. Even people in New York City don't think that. They think the whole system is white. So, but 80% of students are Black or Latino in New York City. But as we see, only 41%, well, this says 41% is Latino and 26 is Black, so that says 67. And then there's Asian, so white is 15% according to at the time of this study. 15% of the students are white, but 84% of the authors of the books are white. and 52% of the human characters in books are white. There's a big mismatch between the students that are there and the materials that we have for them. New York City just mandated a curriculum. They had two choices. So we adopted one. And NYU says it is culturally destructive. The one choice we had was culturally destructive. So now the system has asked us to customize the mandated curriculum to the populations we have. So now we have to do the work of adding to the curriculum so that it'll match and meet the needs of our students. And that's my job in New York City Public Schools.
Who in NYU?
What's that?
Who in NYU?
It's the NYU Social Justice Center. It's in my references.
Oh,
I can't remember the exact name of their group. And then with social justice, like I said, we have to heal the trauma. So there's a new book that came out in 2022 by Kim Parker, who is in Massachusetts, and she also is at Harvard Project Zero. It's called Literacy is Liberation. So it's the D. It was actually a free book for premium members back when it came out in October, November of 2022. Her whole book centers around culturally relevant, intentional literacy communities. That's a mouthful. But it means that we create classrooms that look at students, as we were just talking. We look at students as asset-based. We don't look at the students in front of us as what's wrong with them, right? My full-time job, I go into schools and I work with teachers on how to better the outcomes of the students in their classroom. I work with teachers and principals and the superintendent that I report to. And I've been doing this 30 years. I know I don't look that old. And I'm working with teachers who have been in the field for 20 some years, right? And they all feel ineffective. They don't know what to do. And I say, how do you not know what to do after 20 years? So I say to them, if we told you nothing about what to do, what would you do? And they say, I'd have kids read. I said, perfect, let's do that. And the whole world opens up. When I work with teachers and I tell them, stop trying to do what you're told to do and do what you know is right in your heart, you'll be more effective. Right? With the assessment, right? What question do you have about the student in front of you? Then we can assess them. Don't worry about what assessments you're asked to give, right? And try to figure out what it's telling us. We know what the student can and cannot do. So what do we need to find out, right? And then what do we need to do? If we don't have it in front of us, then we go ask, then we go get the learning, instead of being told what we're supposed to know. So if we come from this asset-based place, if we're vulnerable, even if teachers would say, I don't know. If teachers would say, I taught a course last semester at Pace University, and I used Kim Parker's book. And we got into some conversations about culture and socioeconomics that as a white person, I know very little about, right? I've been trying to educate myself fast in the past few years, but it takes a lot of unlearning and learning at the same time. So I ask my students to educate me and to talk, but they don't talk. College students don't talk. But I was vulnerable. And I would say things and students would correct me. And instead of being offended, I would say, thank you for correcting me. I need to learn. And if teachers were vulnerable in classrooms, as well as that would open up the opportunity for students to be vulnerable, to say, I don't know. Because especially I taught middle school, which is the 12 to 14-year-old ages, which are very, very difficult no matter where you are. I just took a tour. My tour guide was telling me, how do you deal with a teenager? I said, I don't know. I've had 4 of my own and I still don't know. They're middle schoolers, as you know, they get to a point and I thought the story about Don Quixote was going to be the student was carrying it but couldn't read it or was pretending. But because that's what happens a lot. Our students won't tell us what they need because they're afraid. They've had so much trauma. So when I'm teaching teachers, I say to them, look back in their history, see what's happened to them, then you'll understand. When you say, why doesn't this kid do this? Well, there's a reason. They didn't come to school that way. At 5 years old, they'll do anything you ask. They'll try anything. But after a few years, they stop. Why? Because they've been traumatized by their education. We have to undo that trauma. By being vulnerable, we have to have restorative justice. Then we have to decolonize. We have to have culture responsive curriculum, minimize bias. We have to continue to work on what we don't know, our implicit biases. Centering multiple perspectives. I'm sure the Stages of a Single Story is a YouTube that's been around for a TED Talk that's been around for quite a long time. And then we have to connect learning to real life and action. We have to actively counter negative stereotypes. I'm a special educator as well as a literacy person. I actually became a literacy person because I was a special educator and I said, why are my students in special education? Well, they're in special education because they can't read or write. So then I became a literacy expert. And so I go into classrooms and teachers will always say, I'm not biased. I have high expectations for all my students. I want all my students to learn. And then I say, okay, do this. They say, oh, my students can't do that. Wait, you said you have high expectations. As soon as you say, oh, my students, you don't know my students, they'll tell me when I come in. What does that mean? I don't know your students. Or the worst one that I stop, sometimes I'll work with the teacher, I'll be like, okay, so what does that mean? But if they say those students, that's it, I'm done. I'm like, those students, what's that mean, right? That's not a thing, those students, right? I heard the ICT models, the co-teaching models in the remote presentation of how teachers work together to include children. And so oftentimes the general education teachers in the United States will push the special ed teacher kids off to the special ed teachers. And they don't see that the kids in their classroom is their responsibility. That's not a thing. It's just not a thing. There was a commercial in the United States where this woman put Post-its all over the place and she's like, that's not how this works. That's not any of this works. And I say that all the time. So I even wrote this morning, how come the United States general education teachers are so ineffective with diversity? How did we get there? Right? Before there were so many special education teachers in a classroom, the general education teachers were doing something, and with the outcomes being the same, how did it change? What's going on? Big questions, right? Here are the challenges to change though, right? Teacher preparation and knowledge. I'm a college professor. I teach alternate certification teachers. So they're already teachers, and I'm teaching them to get certified in teaching. So they take 12 classes. 12 classes will not teach them everything they need to learn. So when we hear everyone complain that colleges are not preparing teachers, how can we? We can't teach everybody everything in 12 classes. It's impossible. Especially the depth of literacy knowledge that's needed to teach a child to read. A child who has difficulty in reading, a difficulty in learning. So, I teach in a program where 2 courses are designed as the special ed courses. So I heard that here too. There's a course that's special ed. But it all depends on who's teaching it, how good the special ed part is. And then how good is the literacy part, If they get me, they're gonna get the foundational literacy skills every time. So that's because that's my thing. So I go off script a lot. So teacher preparation is a challenge, bias is a challenge, mandated curriculum, as I just mentioned, is a challenge. Students resist change as well. Again, the larger political climate, as I already mentioned, assessment, as our last presenters just mentioned, finances, which has been mentioned multiple times, resources, and larger political climate is there twice. I must have had that on my mind. So here are my resources. So the question of NYU, it's the NYU Metro Center.
I'm very familiar with the Metro Center. I'm wondering who did that from the Metro Center.
Right. The one with actually the Metro Center has, is the one that just said that the current curriculum is culturally deficient. The study of the materials versus representation was the New York City Coalition for Educational Justice. And then this is Kim Parker's Both Literacy is Liberation. So those are main sources of the work that I'm doing in a roundabout way. This is not exactly research that I'm doing. It's not, I think I might be a little different than many of the American people that come here. I do not work full-time at a university. I do not do research in countries. I'm in New York City, working away. Thank you. That's my contact information. Barry Bullis at Pace University. B. Bullis. So any questions for either one of us presenters with the 2 minutes we have left?
I'd like for you to do something very quickly. Just take one of these little pieces of paper, put your name on it. Elizabeth, you can't do it because you already have the book. Because I brought a book, I don't want to carry it back, so we'll do a drawing for the book. And that way, if you want to know more about what we did this morning, you'll get it.
It's a big, your little deal of books to do the drawing there.
Empty my little.
Yeah, so just very quickly write your name on there and.
But you could figure out.
Can I ask you a question, Molly?
Yes.
You talked a lot about trauma,
Yes.
and I'm just wondering, because you mentioned more specifically educational trauma, but are you also referring to other kinds of trauma, like how much PTSD, things like that?
There's so much trauma.
I know,
Especially-
especially.
Especially, I have 2 children now that are diagnosed as bipolar. That, again, my learning and unlearning, every time I think I know the world, my children make my world even bigger. So I'm talking about both. So there's educational trauma, what the system does to children, where we don't teach them well,
Right.
right? Or we make assumptions about them, or we classify and limit them. So those are ways we traumatize them. And then I work in areas of low income, so now there's poverty trauma, and there's.
I come from a very high background. I have 5 children of my own, and I have one who's a dysgraphic and a dyslexic child, and they're privileged. And then my own students all have trauma in their low-income students.
Mhm.
And so, well, obviously, they all have reading difficulties, right? So my children who are, they don't have the same kind of trauma, right? They might have some educational trauma, like that's so much easier to overcome. They have services now, they're doing great. My students who come from trauma backgrounds, where the trauma is repeated, and it's a therapy at school, right? But making progress with those students is, because when you learn about the effect it has on the brain, it is such a huge hurdle to overcome. And so if you have an answer, I would love to hear it, I guess is what I'm saying.
You know what, and that's so key, it's a very key question. And that's where understanding the history that you talked about is so critical for the teacher. Like, your child's history. Even parents who may be low socioeconomic, they learn how to regulate the child often. Not, we can't generalize for any, even with affluent parents. And so understanding the history and understanding the dynamic of your grouping configurations, it's situational. I'm like, you begin to, even if you have 109 students, every classroom has its own community, and kids begin to support them in regulating. It's not the be all and end all, but I think as teachers, we are so concerned with reading and the phonics in the United States that we have a tendency to forget that there's this history, and that biologically the child is ticking or not ticking with you, and that you can watch the child when their leg begins to move, or let's do a hand up, stand up, pair up, and you go to that child and you de-escalate. That you have to be present, but we're like clockwork in classrooms, and that's, I think, with the diversity, and as we've shifted in so many ways, that preparation of teachers is going to have to move toward that, and it's finding that balance of the curricular and the standards and the assessment and the humanizing of the classroom.
And the other part of that is, and this was part of your presentation that got cut off, the parents.
Yes.
The parents, we always say parents are key, and then we don't treat them as key. We don't include them as key. I'm trying to change the narrative with the superintendency I'm in now. I'm in an area where I'm the outsider. There are a lot of people who are working in the school system area that I'm in that have been there for years. And what we have are children who are going to schools where their parents went to school and did not succeed.
Yeah.
So we have parents who won't come into the school because they have trauma. So we have to change the narrative, and what we need to do is, change it so the parents feel welcome, and then the parents unlearn things and learn how they can help their students, that they're an integral part, it's not just the teacher. So we need to, that's a big piece that's got to be overcome. We cannot continue to think of parents as an add-on, that we will do it if they don't help us or not. We can't.
Well, we have a name. Melissa Coben.
All right, we're at tea time. So, thank you for being here today. And I'll see you around.
Yeah, we'll see you.
Yeah, we'll see each other around.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Everybody thinks when I come to these, it's not just on vacation. So I have to prove
Maybe
it.
pictures.
Yes.
Okay.
Mary, can you take our picture?
First the two of them,
Okay.
yeah, because you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. That was terrific. Yeah.
And so any questions?
Oh my God, yes.
Just to take a picture. Here, let me take a picture because I'm going to send it to Amanda.
To say,
Say,
to see.
It's a small world.
Yes, and him.
All right.
There we go. Yes, I'm gonna say, you're welcome. Yeah. You know, I'd love to have your feedback.
Sure, but you love the artwork.
Just give me a word.
Let's take a
I
picture.
like this, I don't really, and I love
So
critical
we're
friends.
gonna change it, let's take a
Oh,
picture.
yes, can we take a picture just very quickly? Would you take a picture of us? It's just, you know, we have to tell the dean we were
I
here.
know, I usually ask audience members to grab a picture. All right, you're in the, your names.
Oh, uncle, let's go this way.
There you go.
Thank you.
These are-
Oh, that's all right.
All right. Other questions?
I knew it was gonna. I knew it.
Oh, you did.
I knew it. So
We got such a nice spot. Now it's open. Yeah, we're done.
Well, no, I have another one.
Oh, you have another one?
All downhill.
Now, I only got one slot.
What's not clicking? What side is good?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a slot, it's over the window.
In, ISC last year. DISES.
That was the center.
It went down, it went to floor 15.
I found it. Yeah, every time they come, there's a call, it goes on the.
Yeah.
Hey, so where do you think you're meeting conversations? And what do you think with about Envision?
It's reading literature. Oh, there it is. Ours is a lost.
Yes, no, everything's moved to skills. There's so much that our schools just given the brain can't process.
Well, that's why
In English.
even the rapid, so one from the curriculum said to me, I said, how come it's not that, there's no performance based, there's no performance based. That's not.
But that's where she works, which is how come 47% of their population, the largest school district in the United States, are Black and Brown.
She's important.
No, she was there 3 years ago, working for the whole district. Yeah, she sat with me and no, she works in schools, yeah, so she won anybody.
Is this the room maybe? But yeah, this is one of the rooms. I don't know if this is gonna be your room. Wait, are we supposed to be going yet?
No, not yet, 2 p.m. Oh,
Yeah,
so we have to talk to each other.
yeah, that's why I'm like, why are you sitting there? It's okay, you can if you want.
Yeah, we're putting on. That's what it is. Great meeting you. Likewise.
Very cool. Good morning, Amity. How are you? अच्छा, I thought you were calling for that. मैं बैंगलोर हमारा एक कोई abstract था उसका presentation है आज. So, no, it's a 2 day. So I'm here today and tomorrow. हमारा presentation तो कल morning में, but वो presentations back to back चलती है ना सबकी. So we were also doing that. हाँ जी. वो तो हाँ हमारा उनके साथ में नहीं प्रोजेक्ट तो चलेगा बिकॉज डेफिनेटली हमारे सारे प्रोजेक्ट विल बी रनिंग बिकॉज वी आर आल्सो साइमल्टेनियसली टॉक विद अदर एजेंसीज टू सपोर्ट तो अभी हाँ वी डोंट हैव एनी प्लान यू नो टू डिसकंटिन्यू इट विल गो लेकिन हम फंड्स में अभी करवा देंगे एज सून एज वी आर डन विद आवर फाउंडर्स डे एंड अदर थिंग्स बट हमें ताबू के लिए आपका जो मैसेज था इट्स मोर ऑन ताबू दैट वी आर लुकिंग फॉर अच्छा ताबू एंड सोना मतलब दोनों है ना ठीक है ठीक है ठीक 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 ओके मैं तो सब पे जाती है रहती हूँ हाँ जी हाँ नहीं ऐसा तो नहीं है आई थिंक हमारे जो मतलब बहुत सारे जनकपुरी में क्या होता है बिकॉज आवर ऑफिस इज ओनली देयर जनकपुरी में जब हमारा फ्राइडे को सेंटर्स होते हैं यहाँ पे तो उन विजन सेंटर्स में हमारे कुछ कई बार क्या होता है बहुत सारे आ जाते हैं पेशेंट्स तो अब मोस्टली क्या होता है यहाँ पे मॉनसून और स्ट्रगल करके बेचारे वो पहुंचते हैं ना तो हमें वापस भेजना पड़ता है बट दे मोर और लेस दे टेक केयर मतलब सो वी वर थिंकिंग इफ देयर इज अ टाइम कभी ऐसा हो कि हमें टाइम थोड़ा रिसीव करना पड़ रहा है वुड दैट बी अ पॉसिबिलिटी आल्सो जी ओके ओके वेलकम दिस इज फ्रॉम एम्स हॉस्पिटल जो हमारे डॉक्टर प्रवीण के टीम के आशीष the new person is Ashish. ये हमारे टीचर्स में होते हैं ना मेरा सारा दिन क्लास में you want to speak to them एक बार चेक करना सब ठीक चल रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा है ना उसको स्ट्रेंथ भेजी पास सही होता मैंने सब कर रखा है फिर भी वो आपके लिए
I'm with Jasmine. 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 Api Jasmine. Oh, great.
Yeah, that's what we should do. That would be a cool way to do it. A musical. Sitting in this chair here. This is one.
Are you gonna be my
Your support chair.
forwarded on?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I will. Let's go back first. The questions and answers.
So,
They
you're
can answer
presenting,
questions. I told you, there's only 10 slides.
so you're presenting.
That's what we've been told.
Although it's using the revolution as it's talking about.
Yeah.
Here we come. And when you're 64 years old, going to learn how. I guess
Right, yeah, you were young, much younger. I remember 63. We'll see. We, a big audience, I'm gonna get mad at people.
That's what makes me my presentation. I don't know who is going to, I go first. Then I run. And it just goes into that. Okay, I think, yeah. There you go. Fantastic. Oh, hello. Here we are, presenting all together. It's gonna be musical, we're gonna sing it, so get excited. Gonna do a little dance. Singing. No additional charge.
Are these platforms dual, or do any of them adapt?
Most are now between 110 and 220, but I don't know. Hi.
Hey. Here we are. Still with us. We met once. You liked us. Oh, a good groupie. This is very, I'm not surprised. Happens everywhere we go. It is, I would say we wait 1 hour, 2 minutes. That's fine. Once you pick up home, it's good to be it.
Could be just you guys.
It's very sad.
They don't know what they're missing.
Let's wait 1 more minute, 1 or 2 minutes. Nobody loves us. Something might happen. Something might involve.
It's such a little group.
I didn't special.
Here we are. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Because I don't want to take her time away. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started because I want to give enough time for everyone. So I'm Cheryl Burke, and there's some.
Oh, yeah.
One close the door. Good one.
Scare them away.
I guess. It's that.
My beard. And my background is in, I started out in deafblind education, working with children who, back in the 70s actually, with, who were from the rubella, with the mother had rubella. So those were the children I started with. And I moved on to do many different things as far as working with cognitively impaired children, multiply impaired. And I ran a school for a while for behavior and autism. And I also was an educational diagnostician at the School for the Deaf and the Blind. So I've had many hats, plus being a parent of a child that's on the autism spectrum. He's high functioning on it, but he was on it and dealt with things there. But in that, I started teaching at James Madison University as an adjunct professor in Virginia. And a group of students for their spring break were going down to Nicaragua. So that's how I met this person, who is Michael Cipoletti, who's the executive director of F&E International, which is the nonprofit group I do volunteer work. So, and that organization, it provides there are three things that it provides. It provides housing infrastructure type projects. It also does medical projects. But one of them that I'm most involved in is the educational projects. So this presentation, I call it a Braille machine, the Braille machine story. But it's to illustrate how to assess and meet the needs of the community when you're going in, and how to develop those creative solutions that you might need when you're going into communities. So this particular story takes place in Chichigalpa, Nicaragua, at a school called Niño Feliz. Okay. So just in general, the first meeting, one of the things that we look at is that, to me, the most important thing is listening, is really learning, listening, finding out what the true needs are, and then observing, and then identifying what resources they have. Because it doesn't do any good to try and do something if they don't have the resources. So you need to figure out where are they, and then use that as the stepping point of going on. So in summary, is sort of learn the story. Learn that story of that community or that school, the history, the culture, what's behind it, the needs, the concerns, and the resources that are available. So this is Niño Feliz, the center there, top center. And I started visiting Niño Feliz in 2010. And one of the rooms, they have many different classrooms. It's a school for special needs. They have many different classrooms. They have classrooms for autistic children. They had a classroom for children who were deaf. And I would go to all the classrooms, but the one we're going to concentrate on is the classroom with the blind. And the first year that I visited there, I did it when there were no students there, just so I could get a chance to talk to the teachers and really learn about that school. And I also, during that time, was learning about the trainings that they went through, because I didn't know in Nicaragua what the training background, how they got to be teachers of these children, and doing their concerns. And then I did provide some workshops based on that. One of the biggest things they had during that time was all these different syndromes that were happening. And it seemed that there were syndromes that were, supposed to be only, maybe 5 people in the world should have this syndrome, one of those really rare syndromes, and they have one. And I was like, okay. And so, no, right. So,
And since then, I've been visiting pretty much every year. There's been a few years off due to circumstances. One was during an unrest period in Nicaragua, and then, of course, COVID. But I've been going to, every time I go into this classroom with the blind student that you see there. And one of the things that this teacher down here in the bottom here, she was the teacher, but she knew Braille. She had taught herself Braille, but she really wasn't hired by the Ministry of Education. She was what they call a volunteer type teacher. And the actual teachers at that school would give a part of their pay to help give her some kind of pay at that point. Later, she got paid. She was hired actually by the ministry. And so in doing some of the observations, one of the things is in that room, at that time, they had 2 blind students. They had 1 Braille machine. They had 2 slate and stylus, that you just punch, which is very hard for a student to start on because you have to think backwards, because then you're going to flip it over. And if you notice, the desks that they use are very small desks, the top of them, and they're slightly slanted, which is not a good surface for a Braille machine. And so that was something that was going on. The other thing was, because she had never had like methodology or anything on teaching Braille, the student was not using the correct fingering. And so I would spend time with him on making sure he was learning to use his fingers correctly. And then, help provide some modeling for the teacher on some of the teaching methods. Okay. So the next thing is, once you're identifying those concerns or problems, questions to ask yourself is, what does the community say about some of these concerns? What are they saying are their concerns? What are they wanting to work on? So before I would ever go down the next year, I would always have correspondence or have someone go to the director of the school to find out what the teachers wanted to learn about or wanted help on. So that would determine what the workshop was that year. Also, just sort of thinking about what is you observed, and so what does that mean to do in the future? Why does the problem exist? So there were, problems that existed with that blind student, the desk, and as you're going to find out, there are issues with the Braille machine that happens. And so you're going to ask those things. And then, is it an urgent problem, or is it a problem that can be solved over time? So you're going to be, the desk might not be an urgent problem. It might be something we need to figure out another way. Maybe find someone in the community that can build a flat table, or we can find someone, it's something that it's not an immediate, we have to do something. Okay. So going back to the story, one of the things that the biggest problem that came up with these is every time I started to go there, I was handed a Braille machine and asked to fix it because it wasn't working. And in 2017, this teacher, the teacher that you saw, handed me, and he saw this machine, handed me the machine, and there are literally the screws were falling out of the machine. The chain was hanging out of the machine. All these things. I mean, it was like it had imploded. It had, and so it was like, I am not capable of repairing that. I can do simple repairs because I was, taught enough and fiddled things with the machines enough that I could do it. But this was pretty major. And so it became an urgent problem because this student was moving on to the secondary school out of the special needs school, going to the regular secondary school in the community. And if he didn't have this Braille machine, he couldn't do the work that he needed for class. So it did become an urgent problem. And so going back to that, identifying the causes of this problem. Well, one of the biggest causes of this problem is that area, especially during the dry months, is very dry and very dusty, very dusty. And so even if you kept covers on these machines, the dust was still getting up into it. And nobody knew the maintenance of how to keep the machine clean. So it was just accumulating dust over time and from the air. And of course, those small dust, one of the problems there is the machine would fall off and on the floor, and they're pretty sturdy, but there is a point where they just can't take that anymore. And the other thing that I found out was I ended up, calling around or asking around with that teacher, who do you use to repair it? And there was nobody locally who could repair the machines. They were just doing what they thought was the best, and sometimes it actually ended up harming the machine even more. So the short-term solution. Sometimes when you have an urgent problem, you got to do a short-term solution just to get it going. So the short-term is, this student needed that Braille machine, right, to participate. And then this is not optional solution because it's not sustainable. If you get a new machine, it's going to fall apart too because we haven't solved the issue of repairing these machines. Okay. So we did for the short term. I went around, and these machines are not cheap. They're very expensive for what they are. But I went around and I got donations to get a Braille machine for him. So this was the day that we presented that Braille machine to him. And I have never heard a student squeal like that. It was in a backpack. I bought a backpack for him to keep it in so it wouldn't fall as he was carrying it around. And I had him, he was feeling into the backpack. And when he felt the machine, he literally let out a squeal like, and was just hugging us and everything else over that. So this temporarily solved the problem, right? But it's not a long-term solution. So looking at long-term you're looking at that sustainability. What's going to make this work in the future? And so one is, we already did a little bit of exploring resources that were available locally, not much. And doing some investigation. And so one of the things I did was call Perkins in Boston that make the machine to find out if there were any Braille machine repair people anywhere in Nicaragua. It was like, I don't care where in Nicaragua, we'll find a way to get it there to them. And they said no, the nearest place with a person they knew was Belize. And it was like, well, that's not going to work. And so, so then you got to seek those creative solutions. How are we going to solve this? Raising funds is one of the things, is part and parcel of everything we do. And then also networking and collaborating with other agencies. And this is something we as an organization, as a nonprofit, do in all of our projects. Whether it's medical, whether it's building, we use local people, we use agencies that are, we collaborate with other agencies, both in country and from the US. And I actually think you collaborated some even with other countries, because like the renal or kidney study was from another country. Okay. So, what was my creative solution to this?
She's certified now.
When-
Certified.
There I am.
Certified.
I decided I would go and become a Braille machine repair person at the age of 63. And so originally I was supposed to do this the summer when COVID happened and they had to shut down the training. So this past summer is when I finally was able to do this. And so I attended their training and went through, there's 3 levels to become a Braille. The first level is just basically you train to maintain and do the simple. And then it goes on. 3rd level means I can tear that machine all the way apart, where every screw is out on the table, everything is, there is nothing together, and put it all back together again.
Blindfolded?
Not like, I haven't done that yet. And what I discovered is that part of it, those machines are very complex. They look very simple on the outside, 6 keys for the fingers, a spacer, the line. It looks simple. But when this machine was actually invented by a clockmaker. So the parts in this machine are actually clock parts. And they're very precise in the measurements you have to use. And it's pretty complicated and a lot of parts. I think it was like over 3,000 parts on this machine. And so the plan is, now that I have that, is to identify someone in Nicaragua, or maybe more than one person in Nicaragua, and actually mentor them into repairing. And it already started a little bit when I finished, in that teacher asked me, because her machine was not working. And so I gave her, sort of the how to clean the machine type of part of it. The part of the things will be how to get the tools and some of those things there. Some of them are your basic tools, but there are some tools that are very specified for just this machine to measure. For instance, I don't think it's in that picture, the little box that makes the points in the paper, that we have a little tool that looks, we call it the lollipop, but it has a little square at the top, and it's precise for the distance that needs to be for those points to do it correctly. So you have to use that particular tool to do it. So that would have to go down there for anybody who wanted it. So going into that other part, which is networking and collaborating, while I was there at Perkins training, I was able to talk to the man in charge of both the training, but also the workshop there where they build these machines, and we repair them and build them and everything. And they actually, he was saying they could actually probably provide some tools, just they would be the used ones, that they replaced and stuff. Our challenge is a little bit getting it in through customs and everything else. How would we get it through without them thinking, oh, we're starting up a business or something? It's like, no, there's no money for us. And then the other thing that Perkins does is they have a program there where they train prisoners on how to repair machines. And then they send old machines that need to be refurbished to these prisons. And they get refurbished and then they're painted, I think gold was the color. And those machines are meant for people who do not have the ability to pay for a machine. Depending on what the person's able, they might charge a certain minimal amount, but it would be, a new Braille machine is, well, it's like around $900 when I bought the first one. They will resell those for $50 or $100 or something like that, depending. They sort of look at what the needs are. And the other resource that happened, and I just this week been getting messages from them, is that the other students in this class have now become a resource. In fact, one of the students picked up off of eBay or somewhere a Braille machine that's meant for one-handed, and he was like, didn't know what, and I'm like, we have a student actually who's part of one of our other programs that we have, which is in English is Health for All Children, and it's looking at children with really complex, fragile type medical conditions. And so because those are still the kids that need the education part of it, I've gotten involved with that project. And there's a blind student there who had a stroke when he was born, so one hand is much weaker than the other. This school actually, it's a different school, not the school that I've been going to, but a different school that's more near his home, made the decision not to teach him Braille because of the stroke. They said he could never learn Braille. When I visited him, I'm like, no, he's going to need adaptions to the Braille machine, but he could. Intellectually, he had a lot more going on. I mean, he could talk, he loves to play his guitar and sing. And so, I talked to the student that was in the training with me and said, is it possible if you don't find someone, because, he might want to recoup his money, but if you can, I have someone who could use it. And as far as I know, it's still waiting there for me. We just have to arrange how to get it shipped, and we'll have to evaluate this student. And I haven't been able, I had to cancel a trip, so I haven't been able to get back down to do that evaluation. But to see his strength in his fingers and if we're going to need to extend out the keys to give, because basically what you'll do is these keys, if they have really weak fingers, you can just glue on, add an extension that comes out. They actually sell them too, but the parts are expensive too. And it gives that lever. So that's a possibility we'll have to do with them. Okay.
All right.
So I think we're at the
Wait,
12:30.
wait, 2 minutes,
Okay.
2 minutes.
Okay. So anything you want to ask me, or anything you've experienced in creating those sustainable long-term?
I have a question,
Mhm.
but then not very serious. I was curious, when you said that you had to go through the third level of training where you're going to separate the 3,000 parts and then put them together, did you really do that?
Yes, I had to do it in order to get my certificate. I had to do it at least 3 times.
That's great.
There is one screw on that machine that is my nemesis. It is very tiny and it's in a very bad spot, and it's always dropping out on me every time I try and put it in.
And so I think that, so FNE stands for Facilitate, Network, Empower. And so we work in Nicaragua, Peru, Dominican Republic. I'm based in Nicaragua. And so, as Cheryl said, the health education infrastructure, but we're always looking towards solutions on a local level. In this case, Cheryl had to go to the training, but the hope is
That
we're gonna be able
we'll
to train
bring it
somebody
to
in
the
Nicaragua on a braille machine repair. And I mean, I think that, you know, this story can be applicable in so many different facets of education, of special education, and of community development on an international level. And so there are so many hurdles that we're coming up against, but we need to be creative in our solutions and how to get over them and get past them. And we can't look at them as stoppages. We need to look at them as challenges and a means to finding a new solution. So
I just had a comment. I love how you've broken it down. I think it's a great blueprint for when we're working on projects also. I think one of the things that comes to mind is even when we're working on a project is you want to get yourself out as soon as possible and have sustainable growth. So one of the resources that we leverage is open education resources, OERs. So have you thought of creating an OER, like short bite-sized videos, just very, very focused, apart from the tools?
Yeah, we actually have created videos like that we house at the library. This Equity built a library for the one community. And so we house things in there for teachers, with teacher resources. We have to make and take it for teachers, an area they can make materials. And so we did do one group, a group that worked with autistic children, made little videos.
I was saying for this.
But for the
as part of
repair,
the
I haven't thought about the repair.
Yeah, like, so that, one of the things we do when we exit a project is create these resources and OER, like open education, free access.
Right.
So that at least that part is,
that's what we've been doing with OT and
Right.
PT too.
And
They're great idea. To our,
so you're doing,
We're going along on it.
I hate making videos, that's what I was.
get on it. Start
So,
preparing.
could I ask, if that's done, could I ask you something? So you also talked about the training part where you are further training locals from the community for them to be able to know this and understand it better and then further, be self-managing things. But like how you were certified, is there any
Right, they would
certification?
not be certified unless they go through the official Perkins thing. But I see it more as I'm going to mentor them. So I would be available through WhatsApp or messaging, whatever, if they have questions or they run into difficulties with anything, to help walk them through.
And the authorization for that certification would also be yours?
Your organization? It's me that's doing it. And they're aware, Perkins is aware that was the reason why it was there.
They've helped us out with some other stuff in the past. Yes,
Yeah.
I think that, that's the idea, to create partnerships and opportunities that enable us to sort of be trained and then train trainers. And again, the idea of spreading information and creating, opportunities.
Trivia it down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we'll shut up now. Here we go.
Thank you for the presentation.
Oh, you're welcome.
Good job.
So, we are ready for the next presentation.
Yes.
It's wordless for persons with intellectual disability in India. So, I'm Radhika Divakar. My co-authors are Dr. Uma Maheshwari and Divakar Viswanathan.
Well, yeah, I can keep turning slides if you want.
There's a clicker there,
Yeah,
but I don't think I know this works well.
Yes, thank you.